Welcome to AJS 101, Introduction to Criminal Justice, Lesson 6, Part 2. Let's first talk about civil liability. Police officers can be civilly sued for a variety of reasons, including false arrest, excessive force usage, violations of people's civil rights, usually related to unlawful search and seizure, and negligent acts like causing injury during a high-speed police chase. By civilly sued, I mean a person who has suffered harm goes to court and civilly sues the officer and the department, because the department has more money, trying to get compensatory and maybe even punitive damages for wrongdoing by the police. Police officers can be sued in state or federal courts. And federal courts usually involve violations of civil rights under Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act. And many lawsuits against police, especially excessive force, are called 1983 civil lawsuits. They go to federal court where the damages awarded can often be higher. Police officers who lose civil lawsuits may have to pay compensatory and punitive damages to the plaintiff, and police departments may also have to pay. Now, compensatory damages compensate the plaintiff for actual harm, lost wages, hospital bills, pain and suffering. Those are examples of compensatory damages. But sometimes if the actions were very egregious, the judge might award punitive damages, which are meant to punish the person who did the harm and deter others from doing it in the future. However, officers who act reasonably, even when proven wrong, have qualified immunity against lawsuits. That means that if the police lawyers can prove that the cops' actions were reasonable even though harm occurred, they can't be sued. And this goes way back to an old policy called sovereign immunity, going back to England, where nobody could sue the king. And that carried over to nobody can ever sue the government. However, over the years, that has been lessened, and people can now sue the government. Let's talk about the special case of fleeing felons. The Supreme Court, in the case called Tennessee versus Gardner, ruled that police officers can only use force to stop fleeing felons when they have reasonable cause to believe that the felon is armed and dangerous. Killing a non-dangerous fleeing felon is an unreasonable seizure of his or her person in violation of the Fourth Amendment, so said the U.S. Supreme Court. Because in the old days, police were allowed to shoot to kill anybody fleeing the scene of a felony, whether they were threatening the officer or others or not. The Garner case was such a case where a felon, I think it was a burglary, was trying to climb over the rear fence and the police officer shot and killed him. And in this particular case, the Supreme Court said, even though Tennessee law said that that was legal, it was an unreasonable seizure of the burglar, Garner's person, and therefore it was illegal and the civil damages could be assessed. Let's talk about professionalism and ethics. Now, a profession, when you think of the word profession, you think of law, medicine, engineering maybe. Those are called professions. And a profession is an occupation, job, with a specialized body of knowledge, like doctors have their medical knowledge, internal guidelines of behavior. Doctors have the Hippocratic Oath and all sorts of other rules. A code of conduct, recruitment and selection standards. Not anybody can enter the occupational. Promotional strategies. So those are the hallmarks of a profession. And many people believe that police work is a profession because it does contain those items. Police work has a specialized body of knowledge. Most states have agencies which set job competencies and curriculum for police recruit and in-service training. Recruit training is the training that an officer gets when first hired. In-service training is any training that the officer gets afterwards. Officers are usually called in 1 or 2 days a year all of them to get standardized refresher training in the law, first aid, or other things, police procedures. However, there's also specialized training that some officers get. So an officer might get like a 1-week course on how to be a breath test operator or a drug recognition expert, or perhaps accident investigation. When I was promoted to detective sergeant, I went to an investigatory school. When I was first made a regular sergeant, I went to a 2-week supervision school. So those are also part of the body of knowledge of police work. Now, this knowledge may be acquired at colleges. Some colleges, especially community colleges, have these police courses. In some states, you can actually go through the police academy by taking college courses and then simply qualify before the state board. And of course, you can get this knowledge, and most cops get this knowledge at their police academies. Another aspect of a profession is internal guidelines, and most agencies have procedure manuals and rules and regulations that guide officers and supervisors in their job tasks. Now, these vary from department to department. Port Authority Police, we had maybe a 100-page manual, and it spoke about dress standards, what kind of ammunition you could carry, what to do in certain situations. It wasn't super involved. Disciplinary procedures, transfer procedures. The New York City Police Department, on the other hand, had a telephone book thick patrol guide, and it literally talked about almost everything you would have to do. So if you had a runaway, if you had a lost child, you would turn to that page. It would say what are the jobs that the police officer has to perform, what reports, who to notify, what are the jobs of the sergeant at the station house has to do. It would dictate what everybody has to do for all situations, from lost children to homicides. Very intensive internal guideline. Code of ethics. Police work has a code of ethics. Most departments have their own. There's also a group called the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is a professional group, private, non-public group made up of police chiefs, and other agencies also have individual departments have formulated codes of ethics to guide officers. So IACP code, other professional groups, or individual agencies, police departments, have their own codes of ethics to govern officers. And that involves things like gratuities and use of force, honesty. All right, another standard of a profession are recruitment and selection standards, and police work certainly has that. Let's talk first about education standards. Almost all departments require at least a high school diploma or a GED, a general equivalency diploma, which is like a high school diploma. But many departments also want some college education. More often, they want the college education for promotion. So it might be a high school diploma to get on the job, but if you want to be a sergeant, you have to have 2 years of college or 4 years of college. Many require, again, more education for promotion. Today, the average officer has 14 years of education. So that means the average officer has about 2 years of college. Many have no college, some have PhDs like I have. Anyway, the average officer today has 14 years of college, and that is increasing. Let's talk about recruitment. In the past, police jobs were not widely publicized, and this hindered minority hiring. When I was looking for a police job, you had to know where to look to find out where the openings were. The New York City Police Department would post the notices in the lobby of their police precincts, but not many people continuously walk through there looking for that. So there were special newspapers, weekly newspapers for civil servants, and we would always buy those newspapers and see what civil service jobs, in particular police jobs, if any had been announced. And they would tell you where to send the application to, and then you'd find out when the test was, and you go through the process. Today, however, most police departments actively publicize their openings because they want to reach out to minorities, to women, and to college-educated officers. They'll often do publicize through publications those people get. They'll go to college campuses, women's groups, to try to get recruits from those targeted groups. Let's talk about selection. So how do we select our police? Well, the selection process usually begins with a written test. It's usually a multiple choice test because that's a little bit more objective and it's much easier to score. So usually a written test, often 100 multiple choice questions. Now, when I first became a cop, these tests were police type questions, questions about law and procedure. So you had to buy special books and study. And that, of course, gave an advantage to people who had, friends or relatives who were cops and knew how the system worked. Today, however, most departments don't do that kind of a written test. Uh, Today, they tend to be general intelligence tests because they want to see if you're intelligent. So they might have you might have to read a law and then answer questions on how you would enforce that law. So they're trying to find out if you have the intellectual ability to be a cop, to read, comprehend, understand, evaluate legal jargon and or procedures. They might list the procedure for something, and then the question would be a hypothetical situation. What would you do to see if you could follow the patrol guide? The next step would be a physical agility test. Police work is somewhat physically demanding in that you sometimes have to fight people, you have to run and chase people, and you're on your feet a lot also. You have to lift up people who are sick and injured if you're helping an ambulance crew. So most departments have physical agility tests. Now, when I came on, the physical agility tests were almost all measuring upper body strength, which, by the way, was a great advantage to males and a disadvantage to females because females have less upper body strength. In my case, it's kind of comical. They put us through, one raider put 3 of us at a time through. And at the time, so I was like 6'4" and 148 pounds. I was like skinny as a rail and not particularly muscular, although I did lift some weights to prepare for this test. There were 2 people with me. One was an average-sized person, and the other looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I remember the first station was doing chin-ups, and Arnold Schwarzenegger did it like with one hand real quick, and the other guy did it medium, and I struggled, but I did get that 10th over the chin. The next one was a running broad jump. You had to run and see how far you could jump. And the Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't do too well because he was like muscle bulky, and I was skinny as a rail and 6'4". I could almost like walk and max it out. So I actually pulled ahead of him there. The next one was lifting weights. You had to lie down on your back with weights behind your neck and do a sit-up. I passed that, but not with any great flying colors. Arnold maxed out. The next one was a jumping over a bar, like a high jump, which I did easy on. He didn't do that well at. Well, the bottom line was, after all was said and done, me, skinny as a rail, pretty much did the same as this guy who was totally buffed. And a woman would have had a real problem because much of these activities involve lifting weights. And again, men have more upper body strength. Today, of course, they revise those and they make the test job related. The courts have ruled that if you have a test that disproportionately impacts minorities or women, that test is not legal unless it is grounded in what you have to do on the job. And frankly, you don't do that much lifting on the police job. You do a lot more running and stuff like that. So the newer tests usually begin with a run, where you have to run around barricades, crawl through a tunnel. The only tough part of that section of the test is, for women, because it has some upper body strength, is going over a 5-foot wall. Then there might be a section that has, then you might move on to like a half-mile run to show endurance. At the end of the obstacle course, in the Port Authority Police, towards the end, while you were winded, you had to hold a replica gun and put it through a hole in a box like you were aiming at somebody. And if you shook a lot, it would hit the side of the hole and it would stop a counter, so you'd get a lower score. One department had people pushing a car, which is kind of bizarre. Maybe all the cops in that department were dumb and run out of gas. I don't know what the story there was. But it has to be job related, and today's tests tend to be job related. There is, of course, one civil service test that women can hardly ever pass, which is why you have few of these women in this occupation, which has been ruled legal. Can anybody think of what that occupation might be? Firefighter. The firefighter physical agility test is grueling. You have to wear fire boots, a big heavy fire raincoat, a big fire helmet, and a Scott air pack, which is like a scuba tank on your back. And with all that weight, you have to like carry 50-foot hose lengths upstairs and do all sorts of grueling, physically enduring exercises. You have to carry a 100-pound mannequin down several flights of stairs, because all of this simulates what you do as a firefighter, carrying hose up to an apartment building, rescuing somebody who's unconscious. So even though few women can pass that test, therefore few women are firefighters, the courts have ruled that because it's job related, it's a bona fide occupational requirement, the legal term is, it's okay to do that. All right, so after the written test, you pass that, then you move on to the physical agility test. If you pass that, you'll next go to an interview. And this may be with one person or several people. They want to see how articulate you are. They want to see if you can reason, if you're personable. So that's the job interview. Then, of course, if you pass that, you go to the medical exam, which is very thorough physical, EKG, the whole 9 yards. They don't want to hire somebody who has chronic diseases or problems that would not allow them to do the job properly and cost them a fortune in workers' compensation. After that, a psychological evaluation. Often it'll begin by taking a written psychological test, and if in fact there are yellow flags on that written test, they'll have you sit down with a real live psychologist or psychiatrist to probe those areas where they think you might have a psychological issue. And finally, a background investigation. They will assign a detective to you. He'll look at all your driving records, your finance records, school records, criminal records, interview your neighbors, prior bosses, to see what kind of a person you are. And in some states, including Arizona, a polygraph test, where they will ask you extensive questions. The first being, did you conceal anything on your police application, like being arrested or anything, or drug use in particular. So that's rather comprehensive. Not all states have polygraphs, and they're controversial because, frankly, some people claim that they're not that accurate. But regardless, many states have them, and Arizona does. Okay, today less weight is being given to the written test, and more weight is being given to the interview to get better qualified candidates. When I came on, the written test was the first one, and in New York City, they had to call you from highest to lowest. And a lot of people scored 100% because they went to test prep classes, and veterans got an extra 5 points. So even if you scored 100, if a veteran scored 96 or above, he'd be or she'd be above you on the list. So that was part, and of course the main problem why they don't use the written test as the be-all and end-all, and the rest of them simply being disqualifiers, is because how can you really devise a written test that can conclude who would be the better cop? And is a 1 or 2 point score difference really that significant to make a decision, to decide whether somebody gets the job or not? You couldn't argue that too well. So it's much more the interview and your background than the written test nowadays. The new officer's first year or two is probationary, and he or she may be dismissed at any time for cause with minimal redress. And cause means, you broke the law, you did drugs, or you did some serious dishonesty. That would be cause to dismiss you. And again, you don't usually have much of the right to due process in a hearing if you're a new officer in the academy or you're on probation, your 2-year probationary period. Let's talk about the hiring process. Again, this is, I think, from Phoenix PD. I'm not sure where I took this from, but it's from some police department. So it requires that the following steps be successfully completed. First, the written exam, and then they go on to a written and oral psychological exam, then a background character investigation, and then a job standard test. That's your physical agility. So they finish this continuous physical test in 4 minutes and 28 seconds to pass. And it's 50-yard sprint, surmounting a barrier, probably a 5-foot wall, climbing stairs, demonstrating the ability to physically restrain someone, running in pursuit, dragging a 175-pound mannequin 35 feet to simulate a rescue, and pulling the trigger of an unloaded firearm multiple times. So again, this is job-related physical agility test. In addition, candidates are required to pass a drug and alcohol screening test. So that's one local department, and I think it's Phoenix, but I forget where I got it from. All right, let's talk about ethnic and racial minorities and women in policing. Prior to the 1970s, few women or minorities were police officers. In fact, when I came on, There were no women in the Port Authority Police. Again, that was 1973, and very few blacks and Hispanics. 1960s riots. There were a lot of riots in black neighborhoods in inner cities as a result of a lot of poverty and frustration with the police. And the civil rights movement made departments aware that they needed to be more representative of the public they served. It just didn't look good to have an all-white police department with cops living mostly in the suburbs policing black and Hispanic inner city neighborhoods. Through wider recruiting, changes in the selection standards, again, got away from the written test, which benefited people, who had higher educations, and reducing the physical agility test to make it more job-related, less upper body strength. Sometimes through affirmative action, which is giving extra credit to minorities, which is very controversial, not always done. The police departments of today are more representative. However, females are still underrepresented, partially due to the demands of child rearing. Many women want to have kids and they want to raise the kids, and the scheduling, even if they do work, becomes a problem, and that is something of a deterrent. Although I think women have less interest in police work than men, or at least in the male-defined police work that exists today. Look, there are certain occupations that are more attractive for various psychological and maybe sociological reasons, and I don't want to overgeneralize here, but let's be realistic. Is kindergarten and first grade teaching discriminatory because there were virtually no men in that occupation? No, it tends to attract women. They're more attracted to that type of a job. And police work, with much of its macho trappings and what have you, is a lot more attractive to males. I don't know, males, grow up and, playing cops and robbers, and they like, now they do the video games with all the shooting and what have you. So it's a little bit more attractive. I'm not saying this is the greatest thing in the world, but that's the reality that we have. And much of police work was defined and created by men. So it's also very macho, the leather belts, the guns, the SWAT teams and everything. We males sometimes made our occupations extensions of our childhood. Which, is fun if if you want to stay a child forever, but it has its effects. And some women, feelings of non-acceptance. I do not think that is as much a problem today as it was when women first came on the Port Authority Police in 1973. When women started coming on police jobs in the 60s and 70s, there was a great deal of criticism. There was thought that they could not protect their male partners properly, or the male partners would get injured protecting them unnecessarily. And police wives were irate at the thought of their husband having a female partner in a patrol car 40 hours a week. Although apparently that's not an issue in an office, that didn't make much sense. But that was the reality of the situation. Today, women are, for the most part, accepted. I've not really seen any issues. In fact, several years after women came on to the Port Authority Police, I really didn't see too many issues with them in terms of non-acceptance and what have you. Because, look, the number of times a cop uses force is few and far between. So it's not like you have to be the Incredible Hulk to do the police job. All right, let's talk about private security. Private security consists of privately owned and operated firms that accept payment to protect private property, private interests, and people. So private property would be, a security guard in an office building. Private interest, could be computer security to prevent hacking. And protecting people would be bodyguards. Some very high up executives in companies, especially when they travel overseas, have bodyguards with them. Private security includes in-house company security services. So that would be where the company itself hires its own private security people. Big corporations often do this. Or it could be private security firms. Wackenhut, Burns International Detective Agency. These are security guard companies. People get hired as security guards, and then people who want security guards go to those companies and pay to have their guards stationed on their property. Also, alarm companies are private security. People have burglar alarms in their homes or their businesses. Private investigators are part of private security. Doing investigations for individuals. It could be, a cheating husband, or it could be employee espionage investigations. And of course, as I said, bodyguards. Nearly 1.5 million people are employed by private security firms, and the number is growing. The first private security companies were formed in the 1800s to protect the railroads and other businesses in the West from attack from mostly cattle ranchers who didn't want the iron horses going through their cattle grazing land. Now, while most private security people are poorly trained and underpaid and just perform watchman roles, some private security people are highly trained and perform technical work, like your alarms people or your cybersecurity people. Private security personnel are not bound by the legal and constitutional constraints that police officers are creating the potential for abuse. The Fourth Amendment does not apply to the actions of private security guards. If a private security guard illegally searches your property or something like that, maybe you get them for trespass, but there's no constitutional violation, and any evidence found couldn't be used in a court of law because the Fourth Amendment only protects you from the actions of government agents. So the potential for abuse by private security personnel has caused some states to require minimum training and licensing. Training especially in the use of force and when you can detain people. And the licensing allows, at least for background checks, to make sure you don't have criminals or people with mental illnesses, suddenly becoming private security officers. Some colleges offer degrees in private security operations and management. So it's a growing industry because anytime the government cuts funding, which happens a lot, police coverage goes down, and private individuals and companies want to get better protection so they can pay for it, and they do. But I think the real future is cybersecurity, computer security, because that's going to become more and more of an issue, is hacking and things like that. The more we become dependent on computers, the more people who use computers for nefarious purposes, the more you need savvy, technically skilled internal security people who can protect your systems and also investigate and find those who breach those systems. Okay, so that's the end of lesson 6. So study your notes and take the test and do well. Thank you.